Hello, I am Jyotika. Welcome back to my channel. In the previous video on answering SAQs, I had told you that students keep contacting me, telling me that they find it difficult to answer two types of SAQs. One concerning the use of research methods in a study, the other concerning ethical considerations of a study. They don't find enough exemplars to answer these questions, and they don't understand the structure or the format of answering these questions. In the previous video, I've already discussed how you can answer a question relating to a research method. I'll link that video in the description box below. I'll also link my website, ibpsych.excellingpsychology.com. You can visit it to get the document of the answer that I'm using in this video, and for a lot of other material that could be useful for your IBDP psychology preparation. Okay, in today's class, I will be answering the other type of SAQ that students find difficult relating to ethical considerations. As in the previous class, I have presented a model answer on the screen, and again my intention is not to read out the model answer or to explain it. Rather, it is to guide you on how to answer this type of a question with the help of the example that I've presented on the screen. So as I keep on giving you insight into how to answer the question, I will keep on illustrating my points with the help of the answer. This time I have deliberately selected one research study for my answer, which I know most students prepare for their paper. The Loftus and Palmer study from the cognitive approach. So I think it should be easy for you to follow this lesson. Still, if it is that you haven't prepared the Loftus and Palmer study and you really need to understand it to go through this video, do go through that study in your course companion on the Think IB site before you come to this answer, because I will not be explaining the study in details. So let's begin with the lesson. Before answering any question, the first thing we should do is read the question carefully. Here they have asked us, explain one ethical consideration relevant to one study using a cognitive approach to understand cognitive processing. So my key takeaways from this question are, first, the command term, explain. Explain here is indicating to me that throughout my answer, I need to keep justifying, or I keep on needing to answer the question why. I am saying that this ethical consideration was relevant to this study. So throughout my answer, all the points that I make about the study should be connected with the ethical consideration that I am discussing. I am not to discuss the study. I am not to outline the aim, procedure and results of the Loftus and Palmer study without any relevance to the ethical consideration that has been asked for. The ethical consideration is prior in this type of question and the study is supplementary. So let me keep that frame of mind when I am answering the question. The next key takeaway from the question is that they have asked me for one ethical consideration. One ethical consideration means strictly one. I must not exceed this limit. So I will discuss not two, not three, but only one ethical consideration. And they have asked me for one study. So again, I limit myself to the discussion of only one study. Again, for the sake of parsimony, you can take this answer for another question as well, which could be explain one ethical consideration relevant to one study using a cognitive approach to understand the reliability of cognitive processes. One question is actually the subset of the other in this case. So whatever you're preparing for the narrower question, you can also use the same answer for the broader question. That is definitely there. So you don't need any separate type of preparation. As I mentioned earlier, Loftus and Palmer is a popular study, so I'm sure students would like to use it to answer two different questions. Okay, let's begin with the sample answer. In any SAQ, the first thing is to directly address the question that has been presented. So the first 2-3 sentences should be dedicated to directly addressing the question. Here for this type of a question, it is important to name the ethical consideration that we will be discussing explicitly. I have noticed in my career that students have some type of hesitation, or they don't really learn the ethical guidelines properly, in the sense the name of the ethical guidelines properly. Because when it comes to research methods, they will name, okay, this is a true experiment, this is a case study. When it comes to studies, they'll name them properly. This is Kosfeld study, this is Ragansky's study, this is Palmer study. But when it comes to ethical considerations, they just don't name the ethical guideline. I don't know why. So they'll start explaining that, okay, consent should have been there, deception was done. But they'll not explicitly name and say, okay, this was the guideline. Informed consent was the guideline that was not followed. Or informed consent was the guideline that was followed very well. Name the guideline. Explicitly write, this is the consideration that I'm talking about. So as you can see on your screen now, that is what I have done in the first two sentences. I have named the guideline that I'm going to be discussing for the rest of the answer. You can take this as a brief introduction in the SAQ. Some students don't like the idea of a brief introduction in an SAQ. Then just take it as 1 to introductory sentences that are addressing the question. Okay, so what I have done is I have named the guideline protection from harm, because that is the one I'm going to be discussing. And I have given a very brief definition of it. Very brief. That is the key term. I am not to discuss the guideline in details without reference to the study. That is why I'm not going to write an essay about what is protection from harm or why it is important. In general, I'm going to give a line as a means of a good start to the answer that, okay, this is what is protection from harm, and then I will keep on connecting it with the study. So in general, protection from harm, as we know, means that no participant should be harmed either physically or psychologically in the short run or in the long run during the course of the study, or no such impact should be made on a participant that later on he has to suffer because of his participation. If instead, say for example, I was going to discuss the guideline of deception. So I would say that deception was an important ethical consideration in this study. I named the guideline deception. And again, I just give 1-2 lines of definition, what the guideline demands. So the deception guideline demands that participants should not be misled in any way with regard to the procedure or purpose of the study. Neither should such details be hidden from them. So as brief a definition as that. Next, I come to the Loftus and Palmer study. So I've separated the paragraph. The Loftus and Palmer study also I have named explicitly. So instead of a long winding elaboration, there was one study in which there were there were participants who had to watch a car accident, and then somewhere down the line, naming that, okay, this was the Loftus study. Right at the beginning, I have mentioned Loftus and Palmer. So the examiner immediately knows this is the guideline I am explaining, and this is the study with reference to which I am explaining it. So I have named the Loftus and Palmer study, and I have given again a very, very brief description of what the study was about. Simply I've stated the aim of the study. So it was to investigate the accuracy of memory in terms of future decision making. That is all that I have stated. There isn't need for more irrelevant description of the study. Whatever I discuss next should be relevant to the ethical consideration that I've pointed out, which is protection from harm. So here I have mentioned that Loftus and Palmer conducted 2 experiments and both had high consequentiality. Why only these details? There are so many details in the study. Who was in the sample of the study? What previous studies had shown? What the researchers had hypothesized for this study? Out of all those details, why am I only talking about the incident and its consequentiality? Because it is related to protection from harm guideline. So whenever I'm writing any sentence in this type of an answer, I need to think, is it relevant to what I'm discussing? I'm just providing details of the study which I'm not going to connect in any way ahead with the guideline that I've presented. Those details I must not include. Okay, so the incident is relevant, so I have mentioned that. I've also mentioned that what participants had to see, they had to see traffic accidents, because those are disturbing. Those were what could have caused disturbance to participants and consequent psychological harm. So again, there is a reason why I'm talking about the traffic accident, why I'm not talking about some other details of the study. So everything has to be relevant, as I mentioned earlier. Now that I have pointed out those features of the study that are relevant, let me explicitly connect them with the guideline that I have mentioned. What is harmful about them? I'm talking about protection from harm. So what is harmful about them? If instead I was talking about deception, and for some study I had mentioned that participants were not told, say for example, that they would have to give a memory test later. So okay, I mentioned that this is the important feature of the study. They did not know they have to give a memory test. Next, I need to explain, why is it a breach of the guideline? Why is this being considered as deception? What is misleading about it? Or what was hidden from participants in this? So in the same way, because here I'm talking about harm. So here I'm discussing about, okay, these features were harmful in the study. Now let me explain why they were harmful. Because a traffic accident is a dangerous, plausible situation. It's dangerous and it is something participants could imagine having happening with themselves down the line. So it is plausible as well. That is why it's harmful, and that's why I'm mentioning this point over here. And what is moreover harmful is not only they had to see those videos once, they had to recall them again. So it is twice that I found in the study that they could be suffering from harm. Once when they're watching those videos, and once again when they're having to recall that scenario in their mind. So I'm pointing out exactly where the harm was being committed in this study. In fact, in the subsequent task of interrogation, as we know, when participants were asked about what they had seen in the films, when they had to keep on recalling fine details about what they had seen, those dangerous, those disturbing aspects of the scene must have become all the more prominent to them. They must have become all the more salient to them. So I'm going on pointing out how harm must have been caused to the participants. I'm going on explaining that. Because as I told you earlier, the command term is explain. So I'm going on considering, okay, why this feature is harmful, why the interrogation task was harmful, why the recall task was harmful, and I'm going on explaining that in the answer. Now, one very important thing is that ethical consideration does not mean that we have to present only a bashing of the study in terms of ethics, or that we have to keep on glorifying the study in terms of ethics. It means that we have to take a balanced perspective. So, okay, no doubt this ethical issue was there with this study, but then why was it necessary? The researchers are very prominent psychological researchers, so they knew this is an ethical problem. So they must have made some consideration with it. They have not asked us for an ethical problem. They have asked us for a consideration. So they definitely must have considered that this problem of harm is going to take place. Then what did they do about it? I need to present that view as well to make my answer balanced. Or if they did not do anything about it, why they did not do anything about it? What was it about the study that prevented them from doing something about this harm which was being caused to participants? So I need to present that as well. Many times students tell me they don't know what to discuss in an answer. So they'll tell me, I've described the ethical issue. I've said, okay, this was harmful, this was deceptive. I don't know what to write next. My answer word count is coming very less. This is the reason. Don't focus on the word count so much. When you present a lot of points, a good line of reasoning, the word count is automatically met. Your priority in writing answers is not to meet the word count. It is to answer the question that has been asked. And when you answer it, the word count is met. So if your word count is not being met, don't think of ways of how you can satisfy the word count. Think about seriously what is missing in your answer. Something is left out, which is why you're not able to meet the word count or the answer is appearing to be incomplete. So many a times this is the case that I want you to know about. Many students have asked them to write answers and this is what they've told me. They just present one side of the story, why the guideline was broken or why it was met. They don't give the other side. That's why the answer seems incomplete. Okay, so now let's look at how to present the other side. why the researchers gave participants a task that was possibly psychologically harmful to them was because they felt that it was not having a very deep impact. As we know, harm is justified when it is done to some extent, when it's not going to have a very long-lasting impact on participants, or when the emotional disturbance caused is just a disturbance. It's not a damage of some type, so it's not very intense. Here, researchers knew that participants would be a little disturbed watching those videos, remembering those things, but it was not as if the participants were believing those things to be real. Or it's not as if they really had to participate in a road accident. They knew that the road accident, even if it was real, was a thing of the past, was completed, and they were just watching a video about it. It was not something, a pressing issue of the present that they needed to address. So it was not going to have an intense impact on them, nor a long-lasting impact on them. Researchers were fully aware of this. In other words, when researchers of a study are fully aware that the harm that they are causing participants does not outweigh the benefits of what they are trying to find in their study, the harm is justified. And that is what I presented here in Loftus and Palmer's study. How the harm was justified by it not outweighing the topic that the researchers were studying, the faulty cognitive processes that we have. So any emotional disturbance that was going to be caused in the study, the researchers knew that it is going to be very temporary in nature. It's not going to have a long-lasting damage. So it's not like participants are going to develop some phobia or some fear, or they will not be able to drive in future, or they become scared of being in traffic situations, nothing like that. So the harm was justified to meet objectives like pointing out how susceptible human memory is, which is a pressing question for humanity, given that eyewitness testimony is a key deciding factor in the future lives of people who are accused of crime. Definitely, such a study is justified which causes mild harm to participants, as researchers are meeting their objective for something that is so important, right? So that is what we present in a balanced view. If instead, say, I was answering a question on deception, and I would have pointed out in the previous paragraph, these are the reasons why deception was done in the study. In this paragraph, I would be explaining why that deception was justified. So I would be explaining where knowing about the purpose of the study, or where knowing about the procedure that is to be done next would create demand characteristics or a tendency for social desirability in the participants, and that is why hiding things from them or misleading them about things was justified. That is how I would have presented this paragraph. Let me quickly give you an example of another ethical guideline. Supposing I was discussing informed consent. So in the previous paragraph, I would have said why informed consent was not taken. What are those details which should have been told to participants, and on those grounds, informed consent should have been taken. So in this paragraph, I would be explaining again why giving information before the study would have created demand characteristics in participants, why it would have affected their performance in the study, and that is why researchers could not take informed consent. In a way, you can also think about it as the previous paragraph is from the participants' perspective, why and how they are being harmed by some ethical guideline not being maintained in the study. And the second paragraph you can take as from the researcher's perspective, why it was important for them to violate the guideline. So you can take it that way. One more thing is an ethical consideration question. It does not always have to be that there is some guideline that has been violated and you're justifying why it's been violated and why it was necessary to violate it. There could be a study that you're discussing in which an ethical guideline was in fact maintained. Okay, so say in this study or any other study, let's imagine there was some other study in which the guideline of protection from harm was maintained. So there we would have two paragraphs. I'm just saying roughly, it's not compulsory organized like this in paragraphs, but let's say to keep it structured, one paragraph would be about why it would have created a problem if this guideline was not followed. So what was the good thing about following this guideline? One paragraph would be on that. And the next paragraph would be about how researchers went about following that guideline. So it is, if it's from protection from harm. So the first paragraph would have been about if these considerations were not made for the participants. Say they were shown something emotionally intense, or some type of an injection or medicine would have been given to them, they would have been harmed in this way. So it was really good that the researchers maintained the guideline. And in the next paragraph, we would explain how they went about maintaining the guideline. So instead of giving a serious dose of medicine, they gave a milder dose. Or instead of exposing participants to very intense, disturbing images, they exposed them to milder images, which would soon be forgotten after the study was completed, something like that. So that type of a question, or that type of an answer, in which you are saying what was maintained in the study in terms of ethical guidelines. One paragraph could be dedicated to why it was important to maintain that guideline, and the second could be about how the researchers went about maintaining it. So you could answer a question that way also. It does not have to be a guideline that was broken in the study. In this study also, Loftus and Palmer, as such, the guideline has not been broken. To an extent it was, so we have presented in that way only. And I'm sorry to elongate the discussion, but I genuinely want to help you. So some things that I see students doing suddenly comes to my mind and I want to explain. So just one more very brief discussion. I've seen students sometimes blowing ethical considerations out of proportion. Please don't do that also. When you are discussing an ethical consideration, and yes, there is a violation of an ethical guideline in a study, it is not always very severe. The violation, there is always a range that a guideline proposes. So if there's a guideline that psychological harm should not be caused to participants, there are vast possibilities in what type of psychological harm can be caused to participants. So it could be something as minor as we have seen in this study, seeing traffic accidents, or it could be something as major as seeing a crime being committed in front of participants, that also say very realistically, or something that's happened just very recently and is yet to be resolved in terms of justice. So there's a broad range of what type of psychological harm participants have to undergo. Every study that is violating the guideline of psychological harm is not causing an equal amount of damage, or is not causing intense damage to participants when it is violating the guideline. So don't exaggerate, don't blow things out of proportion. Like in this answer, if a student writes, oh, they had to watch traffic accidents, so they must have been upset for so many days, they might have not been able to drive a car. That's not true. That's not the proportion with which the guideline was broken. Okay, so just be careful about these things, be realistic. Don't add your own, so to say, drama to the answer just to elongate it, or just to make it sound like it was very important. Even a minor breach of the guideline is important, because examiner is looking out for whether you can think ethically or not. Examiner is not looking out for what severity was there of breaking or following a guideline in the study. Okay, so keep your perspective correct when you're answering. Again, the word count I have mentioned here, because a lot of students like to know about the word count as well. I think I mentioned earlier in this video, word count should never be your priority in answering a question. Your priority should be to answer completely and to answer substantially. The substance of an answer should be your focus, not the superficiality, which is the word count. But there is something that I have mentioned in the last video that I want to mention in this one as well. I do find that there is a positive correlation between word count and the quality of an answer. Answers which approach 400 words for an SAQ somehow, if focused, in most cases they are, so if focused on answering the question that has been asked, they tend to be of a better quality. They have more points covered, they have points well elaborated and well linked as required by the question. That is why they tend to be on the higher word count side. So my suggestion personally would be aim for higher word counts in your answers. Okay, I hope this lesson has been helpful to you. I keep posting lessons on my website, and I will try to keep posting videos on this channel as well. Thank you for watching this video. I hope to see you soon again. Goodbye.